Hello, buddy. Welcome back to part 2 of Witiko of Bigfoot territorial. So, I'm going to continue off where I left off. An ancient language, he said? When met with continued blank looks, Douglas sighed. Come along, then. Tentatively, they entered several places, and Douglas showed, allowing his eyes to adjust to the failing light. He detected a faint glow deep within the cave. What do you see? Golf asked. His voice sounded hollow in the rough passage. Light. I see light up ahead. The path gradually slanted down. The cold northern air gave way to a thick, musty warmth, along with the overpowering stench of damp fur. Oh, God, I hate to imagine what that smells like, but anyway. There was something else, a subtle odor that triggered a memory in Douglas, something oddly familiar. The descent level and several yards along, he entered a small cavern. He paused, studying the interior while waiting on Goff and Blake. The cavern was lit from overhead, a cone of daylight descending from some surface hole that illuminated rough walls, flat ledges, and a half a dozen openings he suspected led to other parts of the cave complex. He grew aware of conflicting sounds that slapped of approaching boots from behind, a moaning wind swirling above, the steady drip of water from some unseen source. What is that smell, Captain? Goff quietly asked if he joined Douglas. Blake sniffed. Smells like rotten meat. Oh, God. I'll probably be like, yeah, I ain't that. Anyway. Goff nodded. I think you're right. Douglas silently agreed. That was the odor he had found so familiar. Quietly, he said, daylight is failing faster than I expected. We will perform a quick reconnoiter, then quit this place. He motioned to his left. Blake, you circle that way. I will circle right. Goff, you remain here and watch those openings. They say bears hibernate this time of year. Still, we will take no chances. Douglas set out and followed the wall. Stepping carefully, he passed the ledge, shoulder height, its smooth surface covered in layers of dried peat. The peat appeared recently disturbed. Beyond the ledge was an alcove. Here the odor was strong. Douglas peered into the dark recess. A sickening wave of nausea came unbidden, twisting his stomach. He lurched back, spun around, and bent at the waist to vomit. Goff and Blake called out. Douglas wrenched again and motioned them back. The wheeziness passed. Swallowing the bitter taste of bile, he approached again. A head lay on the ground, partially stripped of skin. Dry blood rimmed its empty eye sockets. A broken jawbone gave the mouth a hideous, lopsided grin. Shredded flesh about the neck suggested it had been torn from the body, and the body, Douglas discovered, lay behind the head. It was a torso partially devoured, the remains of one arm still attached. He backed away. Oh, God, that's disturbing. Here. Imagine you walk into a cave and you saw all that. Ugh. I would probably vomit, but anyway. Goff and Blake watched him, fear clearly evident on their questioning faces. Douglas motioned to the passage. We leave now? Blake swallowed. What did you find, sir? A trapper. The veteran hesitated. Should we not bury him, sir? There's not a left to bury. Now do as ordered. The company can decide how to handle his remains. A scuffling sound suddenly alerted the men. With a pungent odor assailed their nostrils. They quickly leveled their muskets and scanned the cavern. Goff pointed. There, Captain. Within the shadows of a far passage stood a hulking form. It watched with close spaced, crimson-colored eyes. Damn bear, Blake said, and raised his musket. The beast grunted a deep cough and retreated into the dark. Douglas placed his hand on the musket barrel and pushed it down. No bear retreats from a weapon. because there ain't no bears, a daggone Bigfoot. A sharp sound like the yelp of a wounded dog blasted from the passage and reverberated about the cavern. It was answered by another yelp from another passage, followed by a third. Blake said, "Well, sir, we disturbed something." Douglas looked to Golf out now. They started for the cave entrance, with Douglas trailing. It wasn't long before he detected the unmistakable sound of pursuit. Glancing back, he saw the silhouette of some formidable bulk lumbering along the passage. Maintaining a very distance, he leveled his musket, determined to identify the pursuer and put a face to the mysterious beast. But the thing paused and then backed into the shadow while issuing a series of deep grunts. Douglas waited a moment longer before resuming his way to the ledge. His thoughts churned at what it could be. Then remembered a conversation with McNabb on the journey here. Had the company clerk been right, certainly he would question the man next time they talked. For whatever lived within these caves possessed some form of bestial intelligence. Reaching daylight, Douglas joined Golf and Blake. They faced the cave entrance with muskets trained. Seconds became minutes as the bitter wind wailed and whirled. A shrill whistle startled each of them. It was a soldier waving astonishingly atop the plateau. Douglas ushered Golf and Blake off the ledge and up the path, remaining vigilant for signs of pursuit. There was none. Once on the summit, Douglas was directed to a thin pillar of gray smoke rising from the vicinity of the trade post. Golf joined him. "A signal, sir. Should I assemble the men?" "Yes," he replied. He took Golf's arm and nodded toward Blake. "Tell no one what we saw, understand?" The sergeant nodded. The men stood in formation, eyes alert under their capots, wool hoods. Shifted from leg to leg in anticipation, frosty breath curled and drifted upward with each exhale. Gloved hands gripped cold muskets. Captain Douglas stepped before them. "Men of the 35, my brothers in hell, you'll see the smoke and wonder what we face." Pausing, his eyes swept a collection of faces, young and old, tired and eager. It could be Cree, the bloody French, or those boogers from the Northwest Company. But does it matter? Shall we fear them? No. We are the 35th. Our history is storied. Our honors many. We are strong. Our will invincible. Our muskets steady. Your veterans know me. We have shared battles, slain many foes. Once again, it's time to prove our mettle. Are you with me? The soldiers cheered as loudly as the bitter cold allowed. Douglas turned to Golf. "Sergeant." Golf nodded and barked. "Quick step, advance." He pointed at the young veteran. "You, Tidstill, scout, ahead. But stay within eyesight." The boy nodded and jogged forward. Leaning close to Douglas, Golf said, "You failed to mention surviving the massacre at Fort William Henry." Douglas grinned. "Some things are better left unsaid." Departing the plateau, the soldiers trudged back through the spongy, musky insects quickly reappeared. But late afternoon, the outpost was closed, the pillar of gray marking its location now little more than a smoldering wisp of curly smoke. During the return trip, the scout had remained in sight, musket at the ready, head scanning left and right. Now that the outpost was closed, he slowed, stopped, and crouched, eyes fixed on something unseen through the poplars and spruce. He stood back a few steps, then turned and ran, looking nervously over his shoulder. Golf raised an arm. The men halted, anxiously watching the agitated scout stumble to a breathless stop before Douglas and Galt. "What is it?" Golf snapped. Tisdale pointed toward the tray post between sharp draughts of air. He blurted, "Beyond the trees, at least a dozen." Golf snarled and took the scout by the shoulder. "A dozen what? Cree? French?" The scout jerked his head from side to side. No, I don't know. Giant apes? Oh, crap. You not only got one, but you got multiples. They look like giant apes. Douglas said, "Easy, lad." The boy slowly calmed. "Now tell me, clearly, what did you see?" The scout swallowed. "I honestly can't say, sir. They were tall, extremely tall, covered in fur, like great apes. Gathered around the post." Douglas harkened back to the cave and the lumbering shape in the passage. His mouth went dry. "Did you see Baker or O'Brien, McNabb, Leaf, Benson?" "No, Captain. But there were bodies. The giants were eaten. I think they were eating our..." "That's enough, Private." "Yeah, I don't want to hear him continue," Douglas said, his tone heavy with caution. A gust of wind swirled through the muskeg, carrying moisture from the bay. Another storm was brewing. A second gust blew from the opposite direction, from landward. Immediately, there sounded a series of deep grunts, like the challenge of some hell-spawned boars. "What was that?" someone asked. Golf snapped, "Silence!" As the grunter continued, he added, "Form 2 lines, prime and load." The men promptly obeyed, removing their capotes and dropping the heavy coats to the ground, producing muskets. They began loading the weapons with well-practiced motions. The grunts continued, increasing in volume. Then several hulking figures appeared in the distance, loping through the sparse forest like mighty silverbacks. So these things are big and strong, I tell you. Let's keep on going, shall we? Douglas pushed the scout back to the main line and readied his own musket. As the men finished priming their weapons, Golf shouted, "Fix bayonets!" Steel rasped blades were drawn and snapped into place. The creatures erupted from the forest to stand not more than 30 paces from the waiting soldiers, grunting and stamping their feet in the soft muskeg. There came no further. Then another emerged. This one was larger than the others, its fur as black as night, like the rest of its kind. It had a wide face with small obsidian eyes that simmered under a heavy brow jutting over a flattened nose. The mouth was a lipless gash buried inside its massive blood-matted beard. One large hand clutched a thick tree limb as its followers formed a rough semicircle behind it. Must be their leader. Yeah, that's what I was thinking anyway. It has to be because the leaders are sometimes bigger than the others. Golf said, "Whatever they are." Douglas said, "Witiko." Golf's voice rose. "What?" "Yeah, what?" I never heard of them being called that. He raised his shoulder in a half-hearted shrug. "A Cree legend, McNabb told me. Cannibals," he said. "The Swampies live in fear of them." I remember laughing at the tale when he told me. Golf licked his upper lip. "They hardly look like legends, sir. Cannibals, you say?" Douglas nodded. "Apparently." Yeah, I would say that too. "Apparently." "Is that what we saw back in the cave?" "It would be my guess. The females, perhaps." The beast's leader raised the tree limb above its head and bellowed a thunderous sound that raised the hairs on Douglas's neck. The call was intimately echoed by its companions, a deafening cacophony that swiftly peaked. A pregnant pause ensued, then charged. Golf barked, "Front row, make ready, choose your target." Soldiers brought their muskets to bear. "Present," they shouted. "Fire!" 8 muskets discharged. White powder curled from priming pans to mingle with the soldiers' gusting breaths. 3 creatures jerked and dropped to the ground, slipping lifeless into the spongy pit. Another 2 staggered. Blood erupted from the thick pelt of fur covering chest and belly, staining their black and brown coats with red. They fell heavily to their knees, howls of pain splitting the air. Golf commanded, "Second rank, make ready, present, fire." The second volley proved less effective, most having sighted on the wounded creatures. Those hit slumped to the ground. And I would be like, no, not those. They already got hit. Hit the ones that are coming. Right. Get them wounded. The deaths had no effect on the surviving creatures. They came on, dark eyes fierce with rage, their heavy legs churning the soft ground, muscular arms pumping, clawed hands flexing. Shaken by the approaching horror, the British front rank managed a second volley, wounded 2 more beasts, and sending a third rumbling to the ground. 3 soldiers stepped front the line, panic, flight written across their ghostly faces. Douglas dropped his spent musket and drew his sword. Stand and fight, damn you. Usually I wouldn't say that, but it's part of the story. But anyway, Golf grabbed one of the men and pushed him back in line. He glared at the others. They meekly resumed position. Present bayonets, he commanded. Let's send those... It's a B word. To hell. Anyway. Man and beast clash. Steel met flesh, piercing thick hides. Soldiers thrusted, torn with adrenaline-induced fever. The beast howled, their huge arms sweeping viciously, rending flesh, exposing ribs, tearing entrails. A soldier was lifted high into the air and slammed maliciously to the ground. A massive foot ground into his screaming face. Yet another soldier had his arm torn from its socket. Makes my arm hurt just thinking about that, but anyway. And while standing in shock, his head was twisted to face his back. Douglas faced a gray, pelted creature over 7 feet in height, ebony eyes, simmered hatred. A jagged scar split its heavy facial fur from forehead to chin. A gruntle snarl revealed yellow canine-like incisors dripping fresh blood. Douglas swept his sword crossways, slicing the belly, but its thick fur blunted the force of the blow. Howling at the sudden pain, it swung a thick limb. Douglas dropped to the ground as the knotted weapon sailed closely overhead, ripping off his tricorn, which is his hat, but anyway. Desperately, he thrust at an exposed thigh. The steel penetrated, cutting deep, twisting the blade with his wrist. He sliced up before tearing it free. Hot liquid jetted across his face as the creature pinched back, its lifeblood pumping freely from a torn artery. Yeah. I hate mentioning that right there, but anyway. Douglas came to his feet, his breath coming in great gasps. Standing over the creature, he drove his sword into its mighty chest. Through the heart, then dropped to his knees atop its hairy body. The Witiko released a last frenzied howl before the eyes glazed over. Suddenly, Golf was there, offering a hand. Douglas reluctantly allowed the sergeant to pull him up. How move? Pushing Golf aside, he raised his sword to take the brunt of a huge limb, sweep it down in a mighty stroke. The limb bit deep into his blade, its impact numbing the arm and forcing him to his knees. It was the gigantic black Witiko. The beast roared its fury and pulled on the limb with extraordinary strength, ripping the blade from its numb grasp, pulling him forward with the momentum to land heavily on his stomach. With a quick prayer, he waited for the killing blow. It never came. Rising to his knees, he saw why. The beast struggled to free the blade from the limb, working it back and forth unsuccessful. It howled frustration before tossing both aside. Seeing him, the Witiko advanced with arms outstretched. I think I'm going to do a part 3, and part 3 is not that long.